a little disappointed when I wrote it. I did do quite well on it. I'll full disclosure on that one. But the guys looked at me and they said, "Oh, that's the second longest thesis that's been written at a University of Nebraska-Kearney." Dang it! What was the longest? I can find more. But I was tired of writing, so I finally just said that's going to be fairly complete. So not to bore you on all of my details, it is fun to be in Ankeny, though. Like I said, I'm not native. I grew up in northwest Iowa, Lamar's, and please don't mention Wells Dairy. When I grew up there, it was just a dairy, and now it's a little more important than that. So anyway, it's been fun to come down here. Now, it was kind of one of those rough things where you hear things about stuff over time. And all of a sudden, as I'm going through high school and you start thinking, why do we have all this metalworking stuff in our industrial arts classes? Why do people talk about this plant down in Des Moines area? And all of a sudden the pieces started to come together where when the plant closes in 1945-46, they cleanse it, they start giving all this stuff away. So to kind of backfill, as I'm sitting in an industrial arts class and we're taking a metals class and we're doing some other stuff, well, it goes back to the fact that they didn't need it here anymore, so they started giving it to schools. They gave a lot of the buildings away to schools. They gave them away to communities. So all of a sudden, the Ankeny or Des Moines Ordnance Plant is spread out throughout the state. So all those little pieces start to come together as I start talking about the whole thing. So that's kind of the end game where I get started on it. So I'm going to move forward, or backwards, excuse me, and I'll get to the beginning of the whole thing. So in some of my research, I start looking through there. The one thing that I'm short on right now is kind of the personal part of it. I would love to see diary entries. I would love to see things where people have writings about what took place. A lot of my stuff, Des Moines Register's been awesome. They had stuff detailed. I'm working on the Ankeny Times, gone through some other things. Have a few personal pieces, but I think when we think about history itself, there's lots of facts and figures, which I'm not going to bore you with, but it gets to the personalized part of it where who was there, how did it affect them, how did it operate, what was going on. I mean, all those types of things where that's kind of a weak spot I still feel like I have on this thing where it needs to be personalized down to the person level. I missed a couple opportunities. I had two of my dad's cousins from the Nevada area that I never knew worked there until after their death. I never took the opportunity to tour the plant. I've never been in the John Deere plant nor been in any of those buildings. So I feel like I'm missing a couple of those things after writing all of this piece, and it sounds like the last of the buildings are now gone. So it's changed drastically. So my work is kind of independent from the physical placement of. So just to get us going here, sorry about the PowerPoint format, but I don't know a better way to get it just kind of set up. Yeah, you're going to have to listen to me talk for a while. So does anyone remember the when echoes of war shattered the peace of our sleepy little town, 1941, population of about 750. Ankeny was referred to a retired farmer's town located on the outskirts of the capital. So that would be a recollection that came up later on as we went through. Just the table of contents of what I worked on. I tried to make it real sequential. So it was pretty much chronological as I built that. I will not promise everything in my PowerPoint's completely chronological. Sometimes pictures work better here and there and other ways. So we had the introduction, did a literature review, tried to tie it in with the big picture of American history, World War II, found out a lot about how all of those materials tied together. Now, chapter 2, how did we get selected? I mean, why did it end up here? Community reaction, I would like to think it would be real positive, but I'm not going to say that was totally the case. Construction, went in a hurry, production, reconversion, and then we get to the conclusion of where we would know it as the John Deere plant. So that's just kind of a nutshell of the direction I went as I wrote that particular piece. So this helps kids probably better than it will you adults because you might recognize things better. Usually I present this on a bigger screen, so hopefully you can at least visualize. So the part we have set up in the picture there is showing what we would consider our Prairie Trail District right now. So as you take a look up here, John Deere Des Moines Works. As we come over, we've got Southview, Ankeny High School. A couple of the big things, we got the South Hy-Vee showing up over here, Cascade Falls, et cetera, et cetera. So this whole portion that when I moved to town, I would have recognized as being the Iowa State Research Farm. Okay, so that's the part we're talking about because DMAC got established in the early 70s. John Deere moved in 48. So I used to live over here, take a walk down Magazine Road, and it was really fun going out in the country as soon as you could get there. Which kids can't visualize it if I just say, yeah, this is where it showed up. So this is why I've kind of pulled that one up, and it helps them understand it a little bit better. So if we go to 39, which most of us in this room will at least remember our history books, Nazi planes bomb the Poles, Hitler orders his army to meet force with force, and away we go. And the U.S. is not part of any of this because we're still in an isolationist structure following World War I, where let's not get involved. We saved them once, we don't need to do it twice. But here comes the Lend-Lease Act, and hopefully we can all remember back to our history books because yes, you did study this. In December of 29, the Lend-Lease Act from President Roosevelt was delivered in a fireside chat known as the Arsenal of Democracy. So the formal name, an act to promote the defense of the United States, was passed by Congress, and it was through those appropriations that the Des Moines Ordnance Plant and many others were established. So it's not like we were standalone. It was throughout the country that things were taking place. So as we start thinking about where this goes, it goes back into that big picture of American history. How are we going to respond to our allies? What are we going to do to help out Great Britain, the French that were still playing fair, the Russians as they start moving on, and so forth. So this one, Roosevelt decreed new aircraft facilities should be situated in the valley between the Alleghenies and the Rockies. This map shows the small arms ammunition industries that start showing up. So like I said, we weren't alone. There were 12 of them. And if you note their placement everywhere between Salt Lake City, basically, and back here into West Virginia, and then somewhere in between. Not to call any of my people that I've heard talk about this before as being kind of wrong, but a lot of times we talk about it, we put all the plants in the middle part of the country so they couldn't get bombed. Well, that's technically not really true. We put it in the middle of the country because there were population centers that were found throughout the middle of the country, and you can't build battleships in Des Moines, Iowa. It's just pretty much a given. So they're not going to be putting those types of factories here. They're going to be putting all those out on the coast. We're not going to have petroleum factories set up that would be found down in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, all those types of things. So in order to move things around, find places where there is appropriate population structures. Remember, it's called the Des Moines Ordnance Plant. It's not the Ankeny Ordnance Plant because we're right next to Des Moines. So our population is there, our infrastructure is reasonably there, we've got power sources that show up. I was reading further on this one, and I started to find out they did look at Ottumwa, they were looking up by Fort Dodge, they looked over Council Bluffs, they were up by Sioux City, they were looking several different places, and there were 5 different spots in the Des Moines area that they were looking at where Ankeny was the one that was selected because of the best location. So when it comes down to it, the reason, yes, we're in the middle of the country and it's well suited to avoid people coming in, but if you think about a little bit deeper, all of a sudden you've got a lot of the infrastructure needs that are necessary and the population needs to support a fairly large plant like we had here in Ankeny. So on July 2nd, 1941, the long-awaited decision of the actual location was made. They didn't want to let the secret out because they were worried that the people involved would start jacking the prices of the farmland. So they held back as long as they possibly could. So it'll be 8 miles north of the city, according to Senator Clyde Herring. It will be next to Highway 69. So we had highway system north of the Western Railway. So we had a railroad coming through. And within this site selection, Ankeny was put into World War II at a national level with only Burlington as being the other larger plant that would be taking place during that time period. So was Ankeny kind of special if they built 12 of them? definitely. The size of the plant and what was going on compared to up in Minnesota, down by Kansas City, several of them that are out there, it's taking place. So I just keep thinking, okay, we're a long way from Berlin and we're a long way from Tokyo. So if you just really start thinking about that whole infrastructure piece had to be there in order to be able to get the materials here and the materials out. Now, obviously I wasn't here at the time period. It's fun talking to the people that were about the amount of traffic and the train traffic and everything else that was taking place, because what was coming in also then would be loaded up and was taken back out again. So if you can visualize my maps, Ankeny, and then we've got the whole area that makes Ankeny not look very big. So it's well over 2,000 acres that are taken up by that one. We can visualize the administration building as in being John Deere. Then you had all this land that was starting to take place, Highway 69 over to what would be Highway 60, Irvindale. So we've got that map showing up, and then we've got the association getting it down to the city of Des Moines city limits. Where's most of the workers coming from? Des Moines to begin with, and then others that are moving in. So if you can see that, I finally found this map. I got a little obsessed here over the last couple months, and I was going through Des Moines Register articles day by day. Online searches are kind of interesting. Becomes mind-numbing after a while, but if we've got Kearney, Oral Labor, so we've got Ankeny up here, Saylorville, then we've got 2nd Avenue, which starts in on that one, heading us down, Marquisville, as we've got that one. So it gives you kind of a general layout of the way that that's going to be set up. It's going in there. So they're off. They start building. To me, it is mind-numbing to think that they started in July and they have the first production going on already in January of 42. You look at the way they build stuff around here now. I mean, they're putting up a coffee shop and it seems to take, better than a year and a half to be able to get it set up. I watch the schools and whatever else that take place. It's a year and a half to 2 years to be able to get those things up and operational, where they're talking about 6 months. Now, they did have 5 independently operating buildings out there, so this would have been the first and second building, which then would have increased to 5 buildings over time, which each operated as their own independent factory, basically, as they went. What came in one end came out the other end. 3 of them, I believe, are 30 caliber, 2 of them 50 caliber. So they get that one going. It would be my guess also that some of the laws that we have in place today in building codes were pretty much ignored. We're going to get this thing put together, and we're going to get put together in a hurry. They did have unionization taking place, which, as we go after the fact, we get to John Deere and unions building and everything else. It's interesting to see what Ankeny would have looked like back in the 40s compared to what we might consider it today. And then it kind of gets to the harsh part of the whole deal, where there were people living there. It's not like it was just open land. It was the prairie that we were moving out into. You had a wide variety of people that were living out in this region. If you go in here, we had the Fitch farm, which was the state-of-the-art dairy farm at that particular time. It was the largest of the landowners out there. They had state-of-the-art new barn put up out there, which became the hospital and some of the administration buildings over time. Just the ones I know, the Dan farm we had up there was kind of an interesting story, where the son ends up actually overseas fighting in the battle as his parents' farm is being taken away from them so they could have the ordnance plant. To tie it in, the Ugolinis are up in here, which Bob Fontana is reminding me were his grandparents. So we get back into that particular part. So you have a large number of people that were displaced. You have some of the homes that were moved from here. And if you go to Logan Street and if you go on Pleasant Street over here, there are still a few of those houses remaining in town. They got moved off the farms that they originally existed on. I read, they basically had a 4-month time frame. So you're sitting there saying, okay, you got to be out of here in a hurry. I was reading some, and this would be another one where I'm still trying to figure it out. 4 months is a hurry to take everything out, get replaced, all repurposed, everything else. Some of them were saying that, okay, within days people got kicked off and they had to leave. I believe the one I found out about the best was the Dippolds. I think they drugged their feet. I think they were just kind of going slowly and didn't want to leave very soon. So yeah, they were kicked out in a couple days. But they were asked to leave in that particular one. But they were feet draggers, and the government came in and said basically you had to go. You know, the other ones, you think about us. If we move, 4 months is a short time frame to find all the stuff that we have stuck in our houses, much less a farm, and to do everything with your animals and everything else, much the case of the Fitch farm, which there were some big advertisements out about the sale that was taking place and so forth. One of the sadder ones I found is this one, where it was Mrs. Ed Howard. They can't say we sold it or gave it away. We were just forced off the land. It was nice about it, but his meaning was plain. While watching the construction workers roll up fence, tear down buildings, grade the land, and construct new buildings for the plant, the article stated that Mrs. Howard was feeling very small and unimportant in the shadow of all this activity. But as she thought about her future, she commented, everything changes. No, there are others that have to get off the land, but I can't help feeling the way I do. We worked this land and we had finished, but it wasn't home, but it was home. And when it's her home since 61, when I present this one to high school kids, they have to think long and hard about which 61 we're talking about. So, as we talk about 61, they came out here, they homesteaded in 1861. As I looked further in this one, as I was going through, I did find out that about 2 years after this article was done, she did pass away. So she had to move to town. She wasn't real excited about it. But I just keep thinking about that one where I think she was 4 when she came out there. And then it was eminent domain and away you go. So I just think the statement in there, but his meaning was plain. I think it was quite clear what was taking place. And we just took it. That was it. We were disgruntled. But in those days, with loyalty and patriotism, you figured, well, somebody has to do it. You felt we were doing the right thing. We were loyal. Which then I get to pose to high school kids again. Do you think that's the same feeling tone we have today? What would that look like in our today's society? Would it be stated the same way? And then I'm going to go back here just a minute on this one. As this was taking place, obviously I think we all have a reasonable understanding of eminent domain, where there needed to be a fair price paid for the land that was being taken, of which then when the price was offered by a 3-member board, it then could go up for review where they could take it into the court system attempting to have it changed, which some of them did. The most frequently, if you ever go back and research it, is the Fitch farm, where they were thinking it was well over $200,000. The government came in, were offering not much more than maybe $112,000, which as it goes through the whole process, because he had the means to be able to push it through the courts, I believe it ended up being somewhere around $155,000 for the farm that they had in there. So if that was the biggest one, and you put it in our timestamp going back to the 1940s, $155,000 for most of us doesn't seem like a huge amount, an extraordinary amount, but if you put it back in the 40s, that would have been a pretty outstanding amount that they were arguing about. So that one just, you had the way to at least argue with them a little bit. So being we're talking Ankeny history, it's the Ankeny Historical Society. I tried to leave out a lot of the Polk County and the Des Moines part of it, but if you go researching it, you start reading about, especially Northside and some of the other ones, how do we enhance the amount of housing necessary in the Des Moines area? What's taking place in maybe the Saylorville area? What's taking place in the surrounding area? So I've gleaned it down to where we're focusing on the Ankeny part of the whole ordnance plant. So this one gets a little busy, but you have to think in a matter of months, Ankeny has to decide what they're going to be, what's going to happen. So hopefully the shell plant boom lasts. Ankeny gets its first theater. Now that's exciting. They took it off the side of the general store. Ordnance Plant swell school rolls. Now, I think it's funny in my career here in Ankeny schools, when I look at the swelling of Ankeny schools compared to what they were talking about, maybe an extra 50 or 70, compared to what we're looking at now. It's minor, but at that point, you know, this used to be part of the school system where this museum sits until it was blown down in the 70s. Nevlin was operational. You still have the Oral Labor School, which is now a trucking company down in the southern part. You know, you had some of that stuff around, but what we consider the schools today compared to that are somewhat different. So we got to act to regulate the ills of the boom. Okay, what are we going to do about this beer stuff going on? What are we going to do about the people moving in? What are we going to do about licenses, garbage? If you look in here further, what are we going to do about the peddlers that are coming to town? This one I got a kick out of. They banned short sheeting in hotels. Ankeny didn't have a hotel, but they got the short sheeting part taken care of. So we have a business zone set up. Ankeny's busy, busy, busy. So you start looking at all of this, and this is the stuff that I got out of the Des Moines Register. I've got to get back down to the Iowa Historical Plant to be able to go through the Ankeny Times of the period. They were missing some last time I was down there, so I need to get a little bit deeper into this one. Now, we would like to think that everybody was really excited about this whole thing going on, and these I didn't put in there. So this one, Ankeny holds down on beer. You got that many guys coming to town, they are going to have a beer after work. I will guarantee you that. So the city council, anticipating a boom because of all of the $30 million small arms plant nearby, Monday night voted to allow only 2 Class B beer permits in the city and to prohibit dancing. The maximum license fee, $300 a year, will be charged. Okay, so that one deserves a response. And I was doing a terrible job clipping something, so I'll do the best I can. Good judgment. This one came from R.E. Thorpe, who was the head of the Ankeny Times at that point. It has been much discussion concerning the matter on which the council handled the town business regarding the restrictions on beer businesses entering Ankeny. We know the town council is in the interest of people of Ankeny at heart and has acted accordingly, that they have been looking to the future of the town and show fairness and good judgment in their decisions regarding the handling of many problems when they have been suddenly confronted with all of the residents of Ankeny. We also understand that they will welcome new businesses to Ankeny which meets the sound standards heretofore maintained by the present concerns of Ankeny. But to go further, I have heard someone in this room say somewhere along the line, back then the Methodists basically ran the town, so this would be from the Methodist preacher of the time period. Ankeny folks are now facing the greatest crisis of its history. If things go as planned by the government, Ankeny, the quiet, peaceful little resident community as we have known it, will be just history. In this crisis, many things will take place. Differences of opinions will be expressed. Arguments will be indulged in. Friendships of long standing will be broken. Our town will undergo a great change, and it will not be by any means be for the best. When we see the moral barriers of our town being broken down one by one, we will be inclined to blame or condemn the town officials and those in authority. These are not infallible, to be sure. Mistakes will be made. But we must distinguish between what we would like to have done and what according to law can and must be done. Too many times we think that only the laws that should be kept are the ones that appeal to or not interfere with us. Grant other people the same privilege and see what contradiction you should have. If I had the right to smash a beer parlor that I do not like, but which the law says is legal, then the owner of the parlor has the right to come in and smash my church, which interferes with his business. You can see that the same law which protects him also protects me. So there was not a common theme as I started to read through a lot of this thing. Was it in the long run? Do we view it as a very positive? Could you imagine placing yourself in Ankeny at that particular point? Because we don't like change well as people. And all of a sudden, you have a major change that starts taking place. So differences of opinion availed themselves all over would be my point of those. The influx of labor, and this was listening, and like I said, usually I present this on a little bit bigger screen. So we've got our first trailer families coming in. This was a couple from Rock Rapids. In one of these, we've got them celebrating Christmas, which to me seems to be like it would not be the nicest time of the year to be living in the trailers if you start looking at 1940 style trailers. So you've got this taking place. The first trailer park is operated by the Lean family, and if you go up here to where they put the pavilions, it's not too far from there. That's where that original plant would be set up. Like I said, some of the other people over here saying you had people show up in the backyard, you would have been sharing water. I'm sure there had to be some sanitary concerns. So you have this one, they're neighbors at the trailer camp, but I do like this one. Ankeny finds trailer folk real citizens. That's nice. If you go back and read the phrasings of the 1940s compared to some of the things that we would say today, it's really interesting, yeah. So, getting the workers to the Ankeny itself or to the plant. So 2nd Avenue, we've all had the inconvenience of going down 2nd Avenue as they took out the bridge of late, and now they've made that to be a ground level. And you guys can help me if you were here at the time, but to the best of my knowledge right now, that was the original bridge that was built back in the 1940s that they just got done taking out, which obviously must have had shorter semis, because if you looked at the top of that bridge, many guys don't realize what 12 feet 6 inches or whatever it was, because they had hit that one. So that one's since been taken out, but they had this whole 2nd Avenue project, so you end up with Ankeny being the first 4-lane highway in Iowa. The federal government paid for most of it. So that was really nice of them to come in. You ended up having things take place where you were having to get groups come in. They were trying to get the buses set up where they would actually have them bidding process where they could set up and get routes lined up to bring them up. This one's from a little bit later. This was a picture that came out of the 1940s, or 1945, I believe, but it takes a lot of cars to get workers to their jobs. But you have to also then start to understand, if you start thinking about the constraints that were placed on United States citizens at that point, you also had the rationing of rubber taking place, you had the rationing of gasoline, which would directly impact, because I talked about my dad's cousins that were coming down from the Nevada area. Well, to do that independently or by themselves, because if you look at cars today going to work, there's one driver and there's nobody in the passenger side. So I just think it was kind of funny to, I'll advance here a little bit. Oh, where to go? Maybe I got my order mixed up. I'll come back to it. Anyway, you've got it where there was a lot of carpooling going on to take place. So we had that particular piece set up where we end up having the whole parking region and whatever else set up, and there's little old Ankeny compared to the size of that particular piece. The weather wasn't real hospitable the way it sounds as we got to the end of 41 into 42, and it was reading through it. We had some major snowstorms taking place while they're still setting it up. But I found this one to be just really nice, where you have this farm boy sitting on the fence, the ones that we always envision about the, the pastoral look of everything, and we end up having him looking over there, and then all of a sudden a clover field transformed into an ordnance plant where you were going through the processes. You end up taking a cornfield, turning it into other things. So the transition, and I try to visualize even after doing the research and finding out about how much work and how much effort had to be going on there on a daily basis all day long. It just dumbfounds me a little bit to think that they could set this thing up in the format that they had. So our farm scene is still fading. We've got a plant sprouting from the ground. The lights that they had set up don't quite look like the light poles we have today, but they must have been functional. And we finally get to this point. So everything up to that point was before we were at war. So finally, if we go back and we start thinking about December 7th, 1941, which is that day remembered in infamy, we finally end up at war. So everything that took place prior to this that I've talked about was in planning to be able to get ready to go to a war footing, which I think Roosevelt and friends all knew was coming. I think people that were involved in the country and watched further had an idea it was coming, but we still kind of like that isolationist view where let's keep ourselves out of this world affair thing. And just this as an aside, if you go on and you start taking a look at what the United States had been doing to the Japanese to restrict gas and do some other things to put a control on them in the Pacific, there is a definite reason that the Japanese chose to attack Pearl Harbor. Not saying I agree with it, but there was a reason that they had that one chosen. So, plant details will be withheld. The guards are set up out there. Arms plant data becomes secrets, so we're no longer going to be putting everything out there. If you go through the Des Moines Register, you basically could find everything about the plant that was taking place. You just start reading through day by day by day. Here's what they got done here. Here's what they set up here. Here's how many people were working. We spent $46,000 on this. And obviously things changed. So as we start just looking at the immense part of the whole thing, and the aerial views do us the best. So we have the administration building taking place here. You have the other independent buildings that are being built. You've got two that went up reasonably quickly, and then you had others that started to come in further. The advancements that were taking place in technology for bullet making also start showing up, where they change from the traditional bullets, where they end up having the ones that were more incendiary, where they can start airplanes on fire and they could go through. I was reading on the 50 caliber, they had to be able to penetrate a 7/8 piece of steel. So, I mean, you've got all of those types of things that are taking place. The next part of it, they did put a rifle range up. So if you go over by the Des Moines River, I was just out for a walk there this morning, taking a place out by kind of the Cottonwood area, recreation area. And then it gets you down to Sycamore Access, I believe, as you go further south. So that whole area, and they start putting in this rifle range, of which I have found some articles, plus I've found some of our long-term members saying that that was really fun to go out and watch the tracer bullets out at the rifle range. Kind of an exciting fireworks for a Friday or Saturday night. I guess if you're looking for things to do, you take what they give you. Yeah. So as you start taking a look at that, we had the expansion, which then goes into a whole nother level of taking farms and some more eminent domain taking place. You end up having the berms made. And what I was reading in the one, it was set up in such a way that they had the bluffs that were out there on the Cottonwood area, if you've gone out there, which would help absorb some of the metal that was being thrown out there. Now, and then I was thinking this morning, just as I was out walking around, I'm going, I really don't want to know what's at the bottom of the Des Moines River, because you can't tell me they got it all cleaned up. So I just keep looking at long-term impacts that might have taken place because of all of this as we go down the road. And then just this one, some of this one, like I said, I found my beginnings in some of the early newsletters that I had begun reading. So this one is just stolen from the newsletter that takes place, but they start talking about, okay, here's the plant that's taking place. We have the production floors. We have this taking place. You have a cafeteria out there. You have other places. As I start reading further and listening to people, you're wearing rubber boots. So you have to put something over there, because last thing, if you think about your boots and they've got the metal tacks going through the bottom, which we've all worn down to, you really don't want to have a spark going on out there in an ammunition plant. So you had the rubber boots going on. You would be searched as you started to enter the plant because they didn't want you going in with cigarettes or matches. There were people that quit the ordnance plant because they couldn't smoke. Another one of those articles you found out there, they could smoke somewhere else, so they quit and they went elsewhere. Which I guess I can understand if you like to smoke that good. So you start having all of this stuff take place. Now, once again, you start thinking about the longevity of our plant. Beginning of 42, first bullets are produced, to basically August of 45. So we've got that three and a half year history of what's taking place out there. So I just keep thinking, and I've said it before, the breakneck speed of what's taking place out at that plant, the number of people coming and going and to keep it housed had to be just crazy. So we got to keep everybody going. He's got the guts, give him the firepower, read the caption found in a poster picturing a soldier fighting in the midst of a terrific battle located on a wall. That's the aim of the ordnance plant. So propaganda's everywhere. I didn't pull out some of the advertisements I had found when they put them out there trying to get workers to apply and some other things, but it was all along this theme. Okay, how are we going to help the guys in the front? What are we going to do? We have to make sure they are provided with the information that they need. 67 different steps in order to make a bullet, from what I believe I read. It was 67 or 72, I can't remember. Tina over here was nice enough to give me the, it was from the United States Rubber Company. These were just copies I had gotten to make on it, but it does have in one of these where it actually goes through the whole process of how to make bullets and what was taking place and some of the propaganda. So if you wanted to look at those further, those are just some that I thought I'm not going to send you through. Like I tell the kids at school, last thing they need to learn how to do is make bullets. Some of them really would like to know, so I don't take this stuff in with them. So, I mean, it's just more of the propaganda stuff that took place. Oh, this piece I neglected to state. When they set these plants up, they did have private industry come in and they were operating the plant. So the one here was the United States Rubber Company. So that was the one that would be operating this particular plant. It might have been Remington Company taking place. It could have been an actual bullet factory, but it had to be some company that understood the whole prospect of doing large detail work, you know, for a plant that particular size. So that's when I referenced these. It would have been through the U.S. Rubber Company that was setting up. I believe we now call it Michelin. So that's moved itself forward. So once again, we start taking a look at some of these things. When I start, and I'm not going to go through, but you can just see the boxes of bullets that are set up back here. For those of you that actually had to work there, I bet you can visualize that. And the din that had to take place in those things had to be quite loud. I did look back, and it's one of those where I just start, you know, scratching my head. There would be consistent articles, not only about women workers, which would be anywhere between 40 and 60% of the workforce. There were always articles in there talking about we have Negroes that are starting to come to work and what their treatment would be. This picture down here, and it's not the particular caption, but we had American Indian women coming in from other ones, and this is how blatantly things have changed, so don't say this is my opinion. But they had on there, the caption was, these women are now on the warpath. I mean, so you have those types of captions that are taking place as you go through it. They had some in there where they were blind or deaf, and a lot of them were doing the fine work, making sure all of the shelves were set up correctly, because their other senses were working at a particular point where they were taking place, able to do it a little bit better. So the part we think about where we get Rosie the Riveter. And this was, for those of you that were there, and the more and more I read about it, if you get involved in this whole particular piece, coming out of the Great Depression, this was good money. And you get going on this one where you could be in the 40, 50, 60, up to 75 cents an hour starting to make money through this one. You're putting extra time in. You're coming in for a victory shift. Farmers are coming in during the winter months, being able to fill out shifts because they didn't have any work back on the farm. I mean, this is enough where you could get yourself coming out of the Depression, getting yourself probably back to even in some cases, and maybe moving yourself beyond. So payday's a big deal. She'll use an acetylene torch. If this article is rather interesting, if you got into it, hearing her talk about how she had to do things, and then the changing role of the husband, which was beginning to take place. Here was the one I was looking for before, where you've got the ordnance workers piling in. This group of people had 5 to 8 daily coming down from Maxwell. And that's where I had referenced, you had the whole, you had rubber being set aside, you had gasoline being set aside, so it wasn't going to be given just to the workers. From the people I talked to, tires by the end of the war were not in very good shape. This one, there's your key number if you're trying to figure out how many were built. The best one I found, 3,753,000,000 and odd cents. So in the end, you had the DMLP, printed on there so you knew where it particularly came from. This graph, which I should have probably expanded on, if you get to 43, that's the time of the peak work where you have over 19,000 workers that are producing in that one. And if you start looking up here, you get to 44 where you've got the invasion of Normandy, you had the invasion of Italy in between here. It's not showing a lot of the Pacific stuff. Most of it seemed to go to Europe, but I found where they found DMOP shells that were located out in Iwo Jima and a couple other places. So you end up having that peak production, and they finally got caught up by that particular time. So there were enough reserves if something would happen in the future. So then, even though we know the war goes on until April of 45 in Europe and then August of 45 in Japan, you end up having particular times where there would be jumps in number of people needed, and then there would be decrease in the number. So it fluctuated throughout. I've seen differing numbers take place on the number. The biggest number I have seen is they had 10 boxcar loads a day leaving, and I've seen different numbers show up on that one where it's above and beyond. I'm not quite sure, but that would have been in this 43 time frame. Can you imagine? Now, boxcars back then weren't as big as the ones we see today, but could you imagine how many bullets they're sending out on a daily basis? So you got to get them out to the Atlantic, basically. You got to get them on ships. You got to send them overseas, and then they show up in the hands of American soldiers. Where there's another one where I had found a guy who was in the Battle of the Bulge. He said we weren't real worried about it because we opened a box that had something from the Des Moines Ordnance Plant. Another one in Iwo Jima, it was a guy out of Des Moines. So, I mean, those types of little things where it was kind of a note from home, which there were notes being put in the boxes, but if they just saw that printed on the bottom, it's got to be some type of boost to their morale, especially if they're islands or know anything about our particular point. So, freestanding fire department, one major fire in a warehouse. It didn't take place in the actual facilities. You had your own patrol corps. I've got another picture of that one where they're all on horseback riding around. And the fence that you see, that they finally got, I believe, if I'm correct on this, and they finally took down the last of the original fence, which was running over there north of DMAC, and then there was some north of John Deere at some point. So the original fence has gone down now, but they had it all fenced in. So that's a lot of fence, going around 2,000 some acres. So you had people patrolling in there. You had your own doctor's office and nurse corps, which was taking place. If you get the opportunity, when you go up in the barn upstairs, they've got a lot of that. Those artifacts from the hospital that were up there. So obviously, if you think about just metalworking, you get those stupid little metal slivers in your fingers. Imagine if you're doing that job every day with a lot bigger pieces than what we'd be thinking about. It goes on. Got the E award 4 times, excellence, for what was taking place, and it seemed like the production facility was doing quite well. You ended up having tours, and I got this quote over here. I got a kick out of being I taught middle schoolers for a long time. I never saw any stuff like this before. Nobody had, Dale. But you know, you have 10,000 people coming through actually giving it, and a lot of times these were all associated with war bond efforts. So if you were able to give to the war bond efforts, you could sign yourself up for a tour. You could get inside, see what was actually taking place. So as we get to the end, fortunately, you have that take place. It does, there was a quote I found in there, even with the fall of Germany, I think it was in March of 45, even with the fall of Germany, where the Des Moines Ordnance Plant is going to continue to operate, where they were beginning to shutter some of the other ones that took place. I know the one up in Minnesota was shuttered, one up in Michigan was shuttered, and some of the other ones are shuttered. So they're thinking their capacity is big enough that they can start closing it down. So it keeps going, and then they finally announced that they're going to close it down as we end up getting into July of 45. So right before the Japanese surrender takes place, they start shuttering the plant out here. Work ends, and then they have to go through a whole cleansing process. But I just think of the immense size of that one, and I couldn't find a clearer map, unfortunately, but I think we can all get a reasonably good visual. The immense size of that, if they built 12 of them just of ordnance plants that I had showed you earlier on in the presentation, what are you going to do with them? I mean, you've got them sitting there. What do you got? All that materials. You've got all of the stuff going on. So you got a $53 million war plant sitting idle. Let's put an advertisement out. Need a new branch plant or something taking place. I had seen, as you read through there, they had talked about putting in some type of state hospital out there. I had seen them putting in the alcohol bureau for the state out there. I had seen some other farming structures proposed or talked about coming in there. So I mean, all sorts of different ideas were being floated around there. So what are you going to do with it? You got 53 million, and I started earlier where it got into the point where, okay, a lot of the metalworking stuff is being given away to schools or other structures. A lot of the buildings are being given away to schools, communities, etc. You know, we don't need it all. You don't need the igloos that were set out there that were for holding gunpowder. I don't know what they did with a lot of that. So finally, after all that conjecture starts taking place, we start to get a little bit more familiar territory. So in 48, we end up with the arms plant sale taking place. Anybody remember the amount that they paid for it? Anybody got it? Yep, $4 million for a $53 million plant. Now, looking at the generation of people we have showed up here, you guys can go back and then start to think about the economic successes in the United States through the 1950s and 60s. If you start thinking about the number of businesses, and this would be a completely total different lecture in the long run, but if you start thinking about some of our larger businesses that we have able to pick up some of these plants dime on a dollar, helps you understand how you could have real productivity taking place and the amount of growth that our businesses were taking place as you go back to the 50s and 60s, which Ankeny would be a perfect example of. So it goes on. Due to the construction of a massive facility, John Deere established a large industrial presence. But this time there would be no great influx of workers who would be staying in town. These peacetime workers wanted homes. Ankeny began to grow. Houses sprung up like mushrooms overnight. In a few years, our once sleepy town was sleepy no more, and our peace had been shattered. So about this time, I was going through, and like I said, I got a little obsession going when I was going through the Des Moines Register articles. I did find where 22 acres, which would be the Kenworthy and Fenn development in that particular part of town over there, would be the first one where it starts being developed pretty much specifically for workers from the John Deere plant. So you get those two-story houses that are set up in those areas, and I won't go through every development in Ankeny since then, but I did find that one, and I was nice enough to let my daughter know that she's now part of American history because she lives right over in that particular part of it. So, just to try and bring us a little bit further, so we did have burial pits that were out there. We've got Saylorville Lake. This would be where the firing range was taking place. You had a whole cleansing process that had to take place. So you had to clean the plant up before it was sold. I wish I could remember the guy's name and I forgot to check, but it was someone that helped in the closing of the ordnance plant and the opening of the John Deere plant. We've got an oral history here at the museum. But he was talking about, yeah, a lot of the dirt that was out here on the firing range was loaded up on train cars, taken out to Lake Michigan, put on barges, and dropped in the bottom of the lake. So if you go back to 1940 style, we took care of the problem, which we did. So you just think about, okay, what are we looking at today? And we wondered why when they start moving it from the movement from the Des Moines Ordnance Plant to where we have John Deere buy-in, we end up with Iowa State getting a really good deal on a lot of land where they ran their research farm for a period of time. And then we move into our more modern development where we have the whole Prairie Trail part of it. If you guys can remember back to that one, there was quite a bit of behind the scenes work taking place to make sure that all of the different areas out there are reasonably safe. From what I've heard, we're in pretty good shape. There might be a couple parts that are still questionable, but we'll see. And that takes us to what we would look at as being a little bit more familiar map today, which I was kind enough to steal from the Prairie Trail website. So that is just kind of a nutshell. of where it went place. And like I said, I can't get into the whole thing. That was 50 minutes of just reliving or thinking about what actually took place in Ankeny to take us from that sleepy farmer's town up until what we had in the early 40s where John Deere came in. And like I said, that's another story in itself if we wanted to go through the research, how John Deere impacted the community and so forth and so on. So I tried to keep this my research reasonably compact, where it only went from 40 to 48. I had to stop somewhere. And, we could continue on because we know that Ankeny's history goes well beyond just that particular part, but it is one of those intriguing pieces that we have that takes place. So I have nothing else unless you want to just hear me continue talking. God. See, like I said, when I'm at school and I got kids around, they have to. You guys can get up and leave if you're tired of me. The one thing I would do is if we've got questions, I will take those. Remember, for us to be able to put on presentations and stuff like this here at the Ankeny Area Historical Society, it does take the time and effort of a lot of volunteers, and it does take the efforts financially that take place. So if you feel, I tried to do this, unlike church where they do the offering before the sermon, I tried to at least go before I put the mass appeal out there. It would be something, if you feel like you would want to help us out here at the museum, it would be greatly appreciated. We are trying to update further displays. We will be having one come shortly, hopefully spring break time, where we start highlighting some of the Ankeny Sports Championships over time. Mr. Addison, how many of those did we have? 62? 57, okay. So we will have that going upstairs in the barn. We're looking at increasing our coal mining display if possible to kind of count Oral Labor Enterprise and Kearney. So if you would hear of or have some artifacts that might help us out on that one, or just some other histories that take place, we've got a strong association with the uptown area of Ankeny, and we're going to try and increase and maybe revamp our little bit on some of the happenings of uptown Ankeny that took place in the 40s, where we highlight some of the fires and some of the former businesses. So we've got some grand goals taking place here at the museum, but once again, it takes time and money. So as we work forward, think about how you could help us out. Memberships are available, and you can talk to any of us that are members, or Kathy Alleman as well. So yes, question? You're welcome. Thank you very much.